What's up, class? This is Chef Peter here. Today we are going to be doing our browned chicken stock. So this is a way of making chicken stock where we actually roast the bones first and then the mirepoix. And the roasting actually brings out more flavor out of the bones and out of the vegetables, creating a much more flavorful chicken stock. You don't have to roast the bones or the vegetables to make stock, but like I mentioned, roasting them definitely brings out a ton more flavor, even though it's a little bit more work. You know, roasting the bones, taking them out, roasting the vegetables, taking those out, right, which I have all right here. And then once they're roasted, we're going to be using my big Dutch oven pot here to actually simmer and create the stock. So, first things first, we have our mise en place here. We have our chicken bones over here, all of our water, which if we need more water, we definitely can use more water. This is just what the recipe had asked for. So you want, and I'll show you when we get to that point, but you're going to want everything submerged underwater pretty well. We have our mirepoix, which is our carrots, onion, and celery, all cut up here. We have our seasonings that we're going to be using, peppercorns, bay leaf, thyme, clove, all that good stuff to flavor our stock. And we have our tomato paste. So can of tomato paste here opened up. So tomato paste, we'll talk more about that guy later and why it's important to use when roasting bones for a stock. So the first step we're going to do is we're going to take our chicken bones here, put them in our roasting pan here, and I have the rack removed. We don't need the rack, so it's just my regular roasting pan. And right now I have, hope you can see it, oven is set to about 400 degrees. Hopefully you guys can see that there. So we're going to roast these until they start to brown, and the fat and skin that's left over in these bones is going to render, meaning it's going to be pushed out of the meat and skin, and that fat is going to add flavor when we roast our mirepoix next. So be back in a sec. Alright, so our chicken bones and our wings and our neck pieces and our giblets, which are the internal organs of the chicken, have all been added to my roasting pan. I actually have two carcasses because I had done a chicken like a month ago that I had frozen in my freezer, so I figured perfect opportunity to get rid of the bones. So I'll be doing probably about double the amount of chicken stock that you guys will be making. But what's cool about chicken stock is once it's done and cooled properly, you can freeze it, and it freezes really well. So that's probably what I'll do with mine, and it's perfect for cooking with soups, making rice, using it for any recipe that calls for stock. Homemade stock is amazing, so this is going to come out really good. So just a note about these chicken bones here, no seasoning needs to be added. The only thing we're doing is we're going to concentrate the chicken flavors by roasting it until the meat gets nice and brown and the bones get browned up. So that's what we're doing, just intensifying the flavor in the bones and in the meat that's left on the carcass. So I'm going to put it in my 400 degree oven, and we'll be back to check this out once they're nice and browned. Alright, so we are back, and I let my chicken bones and wings and giblets roast for about 35 minutes. So yours might not take as long to roast, but I really wanted to make sure I got a nice, good golden brown color on the leftover bits of meat on the bones, and I wanted the bones to get a nice golden brown color as well. You definitely don't want these bones or meat to burn, but you do want them to get a good color on them because you're creating flavor that way. And then you have drippings too that are built up at the bottom of this pan. And this fat and drippings is actually going to coat our mirepoix here when we get ready to roast this. So we're going to roast our mirepoix next, but before we do that, we'll take our roasted bones and we'll put them in our big pot here. See, I'm lucky because I happen to have a very, very big stock pot. If you don't happen to have one this big, you can always, you know, just find a pot as big as you can. I suppose if you let your bones cool a bit, if you have a really sharp knife, or probably not a knife, but like really sharp kitchen shears or kitchen scissors, You can always try to cut the carcass up into smaller pieces so it can fit better into your pot. But again, if you're going to try that, make sure this cools completely before you do that, because you don't want to burn your fingers. And make sure your kitchen scissors or kitchen shears are very sharp. That'll just help the bones fit in a smaller pot. So once we have our bones in here, we're going to take our water and we are going to add it into our pot. Now it recommends 2.5 quarts of water, which is about 10 cups of water. But because my pot is so big, I'm probably going to have to add more. So, you know, the recipe is a guideline, especially for the water. But you do want to make sure your bones and meat are completely submerged. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish filling up this pot with water, and then I'll come back as it starts to simmer. Okay, so I ended up adding about twice the amount of water that the recipe called for, but I also forgot to remind you guys too that I'm using double the amount of chicken bones. So I'm essentially making 2 times the amount for the recipe, so it makes sense that it took twice the amount of water to completely cover up the chicken bones and wings inside of the pot here. So now that this is all covered with water, I'm going to bring this up to a boil. Once it starts to boil though, I'm going to immediately bring it down to a simmer, because you don't want to boil the meat and bones too hard, because you want this process to take a while. That way the flavors get pulled out of the bones and meat more naturally. If you boil it too hard, you're going to get too much impurity out of the meats and bones, and your stock won't taste as well. So a low and slow method is the best way to go. So as we're waiting for this to boil, so we can simmer it, we're going to take the same roasting pan that we had for our chicken bones here, and we're going to take our mirepoix, which is all of our cut up onions and celery and carrots. We're going to dump it in here, and we're going to take our tongs and we're going to gently toss the mirepoix in all of this fat. So the carcass, right, the chicken carcass, has leftover skin, and the skin has fat. And as the fat cooks, as the skin cooks, as we're roasting our bones, all that fat renders out or gets pulled out of the skin, and that chicken fat is going to roast up our mirepoix nicely. So that's why we want to toss the mirepoix really well. Make sure you break up these onions as best you can. Mine are in big chunks. So yeah, give it a good toss. No seasoning, by the way, no salt and pepper. The reason why we don't season our stock, except for our herbs, is because we don't know what the stock is going to be used for once it's finished. You know, you don't want to season your stock up and then later you realize, oh crap, my stock is too salty, now I can't really use it for the recipe I'm trying to use it for. So it's better to keep it unseasoned, except for our herbs. So the plan here, get these mirepoix roasted up just a little bit. Then we're going to come back and add in our tomato paste to sweeten up the vegetables a little bit, which adds another depth of flavor to the stock. And you're going to get a nice, very rich, almost rust-colored, dark brown color on the mirepoix once the tomato paste is added. So let's go ahead and add these to our oven and let them roast, 400 degrees still, and we'll come back and check them out in just a bit. So I have a couple things going on at once right now. Multitasking, right? Gotta multitask to be a good chef and to be a good cook. Excuse me. So the mirepoix has been roasting for about 10 minutes. It's not done yet, but everything's softened up quite a bit. That chicken drippings or the fat is starting to really penetrate well into the mirepoix, and it's starting to roast it. So now I'm going to cover the mirepoix with tomato paste and let it roast even longer. And you want these vegetables to brown up nicely. You don't want them to burn, but you do want them to get like a really, really dark brown color. They say it should look like a rust brown color. It's that really rich, deep brown color is what we're looking for. So, but before I do that real quick, I wanted to show you where I'm at with my stock. Well, not stock yet, but the boiling of the chicken bones that I roasted earlier. So one thing that I have out right here is I have a spoon and a bowl. The flatter the spoon, the better. I mean, I have one that's kind of flat, which works. It doesn't have to be super flat, but it's a lot easier to work with. What you're going to want to do from time to time, as your stock is boiling is you're going to want to scoop out this foam and these pieces of chicken that are kind of floating at the top. And it's also going to help you get rid of some of this grease and fat that's floating up to the top as well. Because you want your chicken stock to be as clear and as pure as possible. You know, those bits of meat, right, that are stuck in between the bones of the carcass, you know, they don't really have the best flavor. You don't want your stock to be greasy and fatty, so you're going to want to skim all of that off. And the foam is just a good thing to aim for, because the foam is usually where the fat and grease is going to kind of hide out. So it's a bit tedious, but you're going to want to do this occasionally as your stock boils and simmers. So one last note, my stock is about ready to boil, which is good, because once it starts to boil, then I can turn it down to a simmer. Like I mentioned before, you don't want this stock to boil on high for too long. You want it to cook low and slow. That way the bones have enough time to really pull out all of their flavor into the liquid. So let me turn this down really quick. I'll turn this down to like a low. And then just keep an eye on it. If you notice it's still bubbling too hard, turn it down even more. You just want a very light simmer going on. So back to our mirepoix. I'm going to take my tomato paste here. I'm going to get this into the vegetables. And the tomato paste I used was 1 small can. You can find those in any part of a grocery store near the tomato products. So just kind of get in there with your tongs, grabbing the mirepoix, moving the tomato paste around until everything is nice and coated. Doesn't have to look pretty, right? You just want everything nice and coated. Make sure you bang your tongs every now and then to get all that tomato paste off of the tongs. All right, that looks pretty good. Make sure you spread the mirepoix back out. That way they roast evenly, right? If you have the mirepoix sitting on top of itself too much, then it's not going to roast evenly, right? You want everything nice and spread out. Cool. So now that we have that there, I'm going to put this back in the oven and let it roast even more until it gets to that nice, rich, dark brown color. And we'll check that out in just a sec. I let the vegetables continue to brown with the tomato paste on them for about another 20 minutes. So the tomato paste has really darkened, turning almost like a very, very dark red and almost a brownish color, which is what we're looking for. The vegetables themselves aren't burnt, but they're soft and have definitely shrunk down in size because they've been reduced and roasted for quite a while. So now what we're going to do is very carefully, because your roasting pan is going to be hot, is we're going to scrape all of these mirepoix together just to kind of get them to one side of the roasting pan, just so it'll be easier to push them into our stock. Or I guess what you could do is get your roasting pan close to your stock pot and just pick them up little by little, just so you don't make a mess, which is what I think I'll do, because I have a bad habit of making a mess in the kitchen. So once we have all of the roasted mirepoix into the pot, I'm going to show you guys a little trick, because all of this kind of stuck on tomato paste and vegetable flavor, you don't want to lose out on, right? So what we can do to get that flavor off the bottom of the roasting pan is actually take a little bit of our liquid and add it to the roasting pan and give it a bit of a scrape. And what that's going to do is that's going to help loosen up some of that flavor. So what I'll do to take my little skimming spoon, scrape all of that off the tongs, because that's all good flavor. Good. And by the way, don't forget to continue to skim your stock as it cooks, using some kind of a flat spoon. So what we're going to do is we're going to take some of our broth, or water. It's not really broth yet. Actually, it's not broth at all, because broth is actually made by simmering meats together, and a stock is made by simmering bones together. So that's why this is called a stock. So I misspoke. So we're going to take some of our stock liquid, add it to the roasting pan here, just enough to cover the bottom. And then we're going to take either our spoon or our tongs, and we're just going to gently, grab my towel here to hold it. We're just going to give it a gentle scrape. So as we scrape, we're releasing all these flavors that are stuck to the bottom of this pan. It's a lovely sound, isn't it? Alright, so we have all of that great flavor that was stuck to the pan now lifted up, and we're going to pour it back into our stock. So grabbing onto this carefully, because it is very hot, use both hands. I'm going to transition this over here, and we're going to dump it back into our stock pot. So there we go. Most of that good flavor has been scraped up. We're going to give it just a light stir, just to make sure all of those vegetables and tomato paste are mixed in well. There we go. And our last step, before we let this simmer for about 3 hours, is we're going to add in our seasonings. Now remember, no salt and pepper, because we don't want our stock being too salty. Now what you could do is you could make a sachet, which is cheesecloth. You'd wrap all of your seasonings around it, tie it off with some kitchen twine, and let it float around in the stock in the same way that we did with our tomato sauce that we made. But for me, I'm just going to put them in and stir them into the stock, and then when it comes time for me to finish this, I'm just going to strain it with like 3 or 4 layers of cheesecloth to catch all of this seasoning. So there's a couple ways you can do it. Either way works. So there isn't one correct way or wrong, or one right way or wrong way. Just depends on how you want to do it. So you can see just already how dark this stock color has gotten. That's the difference between a brown stock, which is what we're making here, and a white stock. A white stock, you would make it the exact same way we did, but skip all the roasting steps. And that's why the stock comes out more of a yellowish and white color versus a darker brown color. So I'm going to turn up my heat just a bit, just so it's simmering just a little bit more, because I turned the heat down a little too low. And now I'm just going to let it boil for about, well, not boil, I'm going to let it simmer for about 2 to 3 hours, and I'm going to continuously, every now and then, check on it to skim the layer of foam and fat that might be building on top of the stock to keep it as clear and as pure as possible. So in about 3 hours, we'll come back and check it out, and we'll see how our stock looks. Alright, so it's been a while. My stock has been simmering now for, gosh, 3.5, 4 hours. I have the heat off, so it's not simmering anymore. And I've been using my flat spoon here, which I actually bent. And I bent it so that way I could have an easier time reaching into the pot here to skim out all this fat. And you can see all this on the spoon, all that grease that's there. That's what I'm trying to pull out, along with any foam, any impurities like tiny, little tiny pieces of meat floating up to the top that I don't need. I can go ahead and scoop out, because you want your stock to be as clear and clean and as pure as possible. So this is where we're at now. It's a nice and dark and rich color. Smells amazing. So now what I need to do is I have a pot down here, cheesecloth lined in one of my large strainers. Now the cheesecloth is going to provide extra layers of filter, which is going to catch any really tiny pieces of seasoning, any really tiny pieces of meat or bone that may have broken apart as the bones are simmering, and it's going to catch it, and then as it strains through the strainer into my pot down here, I should have nothing but very clear and very clean stock. So I'm going to pause the video now so that way I can use both my hands and focus on straining this, because remember guys, this is a lot of liquid, it's very hot, so please take your time while you're trying to strain this out. If you have extra hands in your house and they don't mind helping you, it's never a bad idea to ask for help, because you definitely don't want to drop this stuff on the floor or on your feet or on your legs, because it's very hot. So definitely take your time and be careful. And when you strain, try to strain it a little slow, because even though I have all this filter here, if I pour too fast, the force of the liquid might push impurities and seasonings through the mesh. So definitely take your time with this step. So we'll be back in just a bit. Alright, so I just got done straining out my browned chicken stock, and I wanted to show you guys, it's just crazy how much stuff this cheesecloth picks up. I mean, it's just grit. It's just microscopic almost, pieces of meat and bone and broken up vegetables that you don't need in your stock. So by getting rid of it by using cheesecloth, it makes your stock taste so much more pure. It doesn't taste gritty, and it won't have an off flavor. So I highly recommend going to the store and trying to pick up some of this cheesecloth. It really is a game changer when it comes to making a really good, clean, clear, and pure tasting stock. So once you have this, you can throw all of this away. And I also wanted to show you here in my sink, I made an ice bath. I'm going to add more ice to it in just a second, but the idea behind this is using a sink stopper, filling it up with cold water and ice. I can put this pot here that has my hot stock in it right in this ice water to help it cool down faster. So it's one of the many ways you can cool down your hot stock. So that's it for the stock making video. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.